Hello, and welcome to Unsheathed with your hosts, Kyell Gold and Cam Hirosaki. We hope that you enjoy the program. Please stick around afterwards. There'll be cake and blowjobs.
Hi, welcome to Unsheathed number 22. We're here in our renovated, undisclosed location. I'm Kyell Gold.
I am Cam Hirosaki.
And we are pleased to be bringing you a podcast episode on Christmas week.
Yes. Speaking of which, my podcast shenanigans this week are brought to you by a lovely little sort of fortified wine called the Angelica from Visa Tui, which is actually one of my favorite California vineyards that I try to go to at least once a year, which is this actual bottle is left over from when I brought to Kyle's own Christmas party, which was quite the shindig.
It was, although there was a lot less drunkenness this year, I recall.
I was disappointingly sober the whole time. Is that disappointingly or disappointedly? It depends on where you're looking at it from, I suppose.
I think you might have been disappointedly sober, but from other people's perspectives, you were disappointingly sober.
And that's a little bit of, writerly advice for you people there about using your different adjectives and adverbs.
No, wait, that's an adverb modifying an adjective?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Because it ends in ly.
Right.
So we hope you're all set to have a Merry Christmas, or if you're listening to this afterwards, that you've had one. We are looking forward to the holidays ourselves. Kit and I are going to have a long weekend.
Also, if you celebrate Taylor Swift's Country Hanukkah, that's legitimate as well.
Uh-huh. And don't forget that the day after Christmas is Boxing Day.
That's my favorite holiday. I wish we celebrated it in America.
Of course, for Kit, every day is Boxing Day.
My brain just went actually, it didn't go all sorts of places. It just went one place, and I'm pretty sure that folks can guess what that place was.
So anyway, I also like the holidays from sort of a personal angle because things slow down a bit, and a lot of times, I like to set up a routine where I have time to write in and amongst all the other little things that I do during the week. I go to the gym, work out, I have a full-time job, I record a podcast, I meet with some writing groups, I go out with friends and stuff, and I kind of have to wedge my writing time in there. The holidays are kind of nice because we have, Christmas, obviously, we're going to, be opening presents, we're going to have a dinner and all that kind of stuff, probably go out and see some movies, but there's probably going to be a lot of downtime, and I'm looking forward to, if not Christmas Day, then maybe during the weekend, having a little bit of time to wrap up some editing I'm working on for the cupcakes project that we've talked about online and I think on the podcast.
If you haven't, the general notion is that Fur Planet is going to be publishing a line of printed novellas, which are going to be done by our very own Kyell, by Rikoshi, and by Foosball.
And we're very excited to have, I'm excited to be working with those other authors because I hold them in very high esteem. Mine is one of the first ones to come out. Basically,
It's the first one.
Well, it is the first one. It's also one of the first ones by definition, but yours is more accurate. And I'm trying to get it kind of whipped into shape by the end of the calendar year, so that we can get it out to Fur Planet by the middle of January and have it ready to come out at Fur Fiesta. And I've gotten Kyovi to do the artwork for it. She's given me some sketches, and I'm very excited about the whole thing. I'm about, I would say about a third of the way through right now. So
Through the editing,
yeah. It's fun going back, and I talk a lot about the editing process whenever I'm doing it with any of my books, but it's fun to go back and kind of remember what idea I was trying to get across and say, sometimes I'll just write sentences down because they sound good, and it kind of is close to what I wanted to say, but then I look at it again and, I think, that really doesn't make much sense. I could just take that whole thing out. Or there's a little digression and, I need to fill space because they need to get from one place to the other, and I think, I could do that more efficiently. And it's really cool to be able to go back into a story and like tighten up and make it much more reflective of the idea that I had in my head when I started writing it.
Yeah, I know how that feels too. I know that there have been a few times where I've mentioned, having like core ideas with stories and having like the image of that change throughout the course of writing it. And I know I mentioned it at least one point, the whole concept of, once you have the story on paper the first time, that's when all the rewriting can be done much more directly, and you really do notice a different, and it feels different writing it once you already have an initial draft out of the way.
And the big challenge is, when you're doing your first draft, the possibilities are completely wide open. It's just endless, infinite possibilities. When you're going back to do a rewrite, there's a tendency to get yourself locked into what you've already got on paper. To say, well, I've written this scene, I can't change it now. I can just refine the scene. And you have to be comfortable with saying, I think the story would be better served if that scene was gone. Or if I added a scene where they did this, or, what have you.
I actually have an excision folder within my writing folders
Very
on my
scholarly
laptop, where it's all like scenes and parts that I cut out of things and I put them into different files. Not necessarily with the intent to ever use them again, but just so that they're not lost, just so I still have them.
Right.
So I don't feel as bad about, I took this out. Well, it's like, it still exists.
Yeah, and I keep files with the story title and then unused, and whenever I take something out of a document, I always just drop it into that file. So sometimes I'll print outtakes from books here and there, and that's usually where those come from.
Yeah. I'm in the process of editing a longer story that I've mentioned a few times now, where I got through a first draft and I don't know quite what I was going for in the first draft, but I have a better idea now, and it turns out I have a much longer and more complex story in my paws than I was originally planning on, and it's actually, I think, daunting and imposing enough that I think I'm going to have to write another short story first, just to sort of get it out of my head, and so I can reapproach it with a fresh, energized brain, because right now it's just kind of too scary for me to look at.
One more item before we get to the questions, which actually is this week we're catching up on some old questions that are a little bit relevant to the process of editing and publication and artwork specifically. Mm-hmm. But just a quick note, I got some really astounding news last week. There's an editor by the name of Eliza Roll, and reviewer, not an editor, and Sofa Wolf sent her Waterways a couple years ago, and then she really liked it, and so she requested more books from him, and we sent her Out of Position, and she liked that one even a little bit more, and she decided this year to start giving out some awards for the titles that she reviews, because she reviews a lot of gay fiction, mostly romance, but not entirely, and she reviews hundreds of books a year. There's like a new review 4 or 5 a week, I think, on her live journal.
Yeah, I can't imagine having that much time to read. I'm kind of jealous.
Yeah, I don't know how she does it, but she actually went about this in a really professional way. She got a bunch of readers to serve as judges, and then she put all the books up on her site. So the judges picked a pool of books, and then she put all the books up on her site and let the readers choose the most popular ones in a bunch of categories. And those popular ones went in with the judges' choices into a final round where she had 60 judges from around the world reading, I think it was like 100-some books in the final round. And each of the judges rated them on a system that I'm assuming she set up and gave to them. And they came up with, so she came up then with the top books out of the 500 and whatever that were originally placed in. And as it turns out, we found out about a week and a half ago that Out of Position was judged tied for number one out of a bunch of mainstream gay books.
Yeah, just to stress, this isn't like gay furry stuff. This is just gay, fiction.
Yeah, and it's not like, furries swarmed the polls and all voted for their one favorite book.
Because I don't even think that furries on the whole were aware of this being judged.
Well, they did actually. The way it got in is they did vote for it in Best Fantasy, And so that's how it got into the judging round, is it
Right.
got more votes in the fantasy category.
But it's still the judges who had to go and give
right.
it that honor.
It was judged by three different people who, I mean, you go look on the best, it also won Best Fantasy Novel, and when you go look on that site, she has excerpts from the judges' comments, and they all said very nice things about it, including one judge who said, paraphrasing, I didn't think I would be able to get into the whole furry thing, but the book drew me into it.
Yeah. So all those people out there who, sort of will claim that, the mainstream doesn't and won't and can't understand furries, and we're always going to be this sort of like weird like oppression, we have to put up with that. Apparently that's BS.
And that, I think, is one of the coolest things to come out of it. Bucktown Tiger said something on Twitter about it, where he said, this is really an inspiration to those of us in the creative fields in furry, because it shows us that there's a possibility that our work can be appreciated outside of the fandom.
Yeah.
And I'm totally behind that. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to shove things in people's faces and say, admire it because furry is better than anything else. But put it out in the mainstream. Let it be judged on its own merits. I mean, I've heard some of Bucktown's music, and that stands with a lot of what I would hear on the radio. So I don't understand that. There's no reason why he couldn't be
there's been furry stuff that's always had mainstream appeal. People don't call it furry because the mainstream doesn't have this fandom to identify with it. But the fact that it's got, animal, people, critter characters doesn't relegate it to only being appreciated by us, not by any stretch.
No, although someone brought this up on the Live Journal too, where they were talking about Redwall and a lot of the Disney movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I would draw a line because it's much, much rarer to see anthropomorphic animal characters, like humanoid. Anthropomorphic can also mean like, the rescuers and
right.
where animals are kind of mostly animals. But I'm talking more like Disney's Robin Hood, which is really rare. And when you think about it, anytime people want to give an example of what the characters in the fandom are like, 9 times out of 10 they'll point to, well, think about Disney's Robin Hood.
Yeah.
It's because there's so few examples of that out in the mainstream. Redwall is animals.
Right.
Watership Down is animals.
Well, Redwall, they at least wear clothes and talk and have dinner utensils.
It's true.
Watership Down, they're just like animals.
Well, right. I mean, Redwall, they have, and again, I'm not super familiar with the Redwall books, but I think they have the predator-prey relationship kind of intact from the natural world, and the size differences are all the same, too.
That's true. And they also play up the species stereotypes a bit too strongly, I think, personally, but...
Which is also a problem in furry, but those stereotypes are a little different, and we've talked about that in another episode. But so I think when people say, oh, the mainstream doesn't like furry stuff, and we say there's an aversion to anthropomorphic stuff, it's not, I'm writing a book about a bunch of foxes that flee their home because it's being torn up by bulldozers, and they have a little culture, and they sip tea in the afternoons and all that, and they eat mice and run away from owls and stuff. It's more like, to be honest, the out of position world where there's no humans and it's just animals taking the place of humans in that world. Because I think a lot of people have much more difficulty wrapping their heads around that than they do around, well, it's an animal world where it's like Wind in the Willows, where animals sort of mirror human society, but in their own context.
Right. But I mean, as furry fans, we already know how to wrap our heads around that, so...
Well, that's true. The point being, the right kind of work can also do that out in the mainstream.
Yes.
And I know
apparently your work is that kind of work, so congratulations.
Which, thank you. It's extremely flattering. The more I think about it, the more unreal it all seems. But
I'm very proud of you as a fellow writer and your fellow podcaster. I'm very proud of you.
Cool. Thank you. So let's get to some questions. This one actually came to us about over a month ago now, and we apologize for the delay, but there really wasn't a time to read it before then, and we had some older questions that we had to take care of. But this is from Storm Kitty, and I believe it's a he.
I believe so.
I'm gonna guess because you have about a 70-80% chance of being right if you just guess he in the furry fandom.
And if we're wrong, we apologize.
Right.
Or Kyell apologized because he's the one guessing.
The kitty is the part that makes me pause, because I think half the females in the furry fandom are kitties of some sort. But
yeah, but most of the male felines I know refer to themselves as kitties too. But they're all twinky little faggots, so.
There's something in that. So Storm Kitty, whom Kame Hirosaki says is a twinky little faggot, says,
That's what I meant.
Hi, I began listening to Unsheathed about a week ago and caught up all 14 of the currently available episodes. And hopefully you've caught up with the next 8. I have this 50,000-word story that's mostly male-female erotica with significant BDSM and sex slavery themes. I've received some very positive feedback about it, and lately I've been thinking about getting published in a Dead Tree edition. Although it's unlikely I'd take down the online edition, I'd probably write some additional stories using the same characters and setting to include in the print edition, at least some of which I would not make available online. My question is, what can you suggest I do about artwork for the print edition? I realize a nice cover image can help sales, but I'm guessing a full-color front cover image of the quality I would like, someone on par with Blotch, Heather Bruton, or Casey Miyagami, would cost upwards of $100, and would go up from there if I had them produce some inked interior illustrations as well. I'm concerned that the artwork could end up costing more than I'd ever make back from sales of the book. What advice do you have in the matter? Also, do you have any suggestions on which publishers for the furry fandom I should talk to?
So yeah, for some of those artists you mentioned, the upwards of $1,000 or upwards of $100, emphasis on the upwards there.
Yeah.
But
I mean, if you think about it, first of all, I know Heather's usually pretty good and professional, but I don't know what her availability is to do commissions.
She has a very long queue. It's about a year long.
Yeah. I don't know about Casey Miyagami. I know Blotch generally doesn't take commissions either.
Right. But the question isn't so much about commissions, it's about artwork for publications. And now there's 2 things to consider here. Are you talking about getting a publisher to publish it, or are you self-publishing? If you're self-publishing, then yeah, you're going to have to front this all yourself, and it's going to be up to you to gauge, okay, how much money can I afford for my art, and how much do I expect to make on the project? If you're having a publisher go and do it, then it falls to the publisher to get that for you.
Yeah, in general, when I've worked with publishers, it kind of goes like, if the author has connections with an artist, like I know with the cupcakes that we were talking about, Foosball is friends with an artist who's done some work with him before, whose work is really good, and he thinks he'd be able to get him to do the art for his story. I'd met Kyovi and talked to her about doing the art for my book, so we worked that out, and I paid her as if it were a commission. But generally, if I would gauge interest from a publisher first,
right? And
the publisher I would talk to for a 53,000 word, which is a really short novel. It sounds like you'd write a little more for it, so if you get it up in the 75,000 word range, that's pretty good for a short novel.
Yeah.
I would say really Fur Planet.
Yeah, that was going to be my recommendation as well.
And I know Fuzzwolf over there has some artists that he keeps connections with,
right.
And generally you and he could work out what the payment schedule would be, where, I'm not sure how he would do that, because like I said, we're doing the cupcakes through Fur Planet, but we're taking care of all the artwork ourselves.
Yeah, and I haven't actually done anything personally through Fur Planet. I have some stuff that was put up by Bad Dog Books, which Fur Planet distributes, but that didn't have artwork in it. So.
Right. But, yeah, I would say, Fuzzwolf's really good about getting furry stuff out there.
Yeah.
And he has connections with some artists, so if you don't have any connections or you don't have an artist to publish, then, he'll be able to see what he can do. And I think when I was initially talking to him, he was talking about maybe, he would front the money for the artwork and take the expense out of the profits from the book.
Right. And so, my recommendation on that is if there is an artist that you want to do the art, talk to the publisher and say, hey, could you get in touch with this artist for me and see if they will do this art for a printed publication. Because for a lot of artists, and in fact I'd say most artists, having a publisher saying, hey, would you like to, provide us art for a, something we're going to publish, is different than, hey, can I give you money to draw my character?
Right, and it's not necessarily that it'll be any cheaper. I certainly don't recommend you go to artists and say, hey, you should do this for cheap because it'll be published, because that's sleazy and artists hate it.
Yeah,
and,
I would too. do the same work, but I want to pay you less.
But what they might do is say, well, I know we're working with a publisher. I know Fur Planet goes around to these conventions, so I'll bump it up on my commission list. I'll regard it as professional work rather than, a fan commission can wait a couple weeks or a month. But,
or longer.
Yes, I'm sure we've all waited longer for commissions. So, yeah, I would contact Fur Planet. I know Sofa Wolf is preparing novel submission guidelines, but so you might want to keep an eye out for them. I don't know what their time frame is, but those are basically the two publishers that do books that I'm aware of in the fandom.
Yeah, and for longer works, I mean, we've mentioned Fuzzwolf because we have been talking to him, and we know that this is the sort of thing that he may possibly be open to. As a general rule, though, just sort of showing up at a publisher and saying, "Hey, I wrote a novel. Will you publish it?" Like, that's kind of not the best way to go about things because there's a big time and effort commitment to that, and if you're not a known quantity, they're probably going to err on the side of like, no, sorry, we're not doing this.
Right. And I mean, when we say get in touch, you should present your novel as professionally as possible. I mean, the way that I would do it is send a sample of the story, proofread it, make sure it is your absolute best foot forward.
Yeah.
Don't send them the thing and say, well, here's what I have now. I will polish it later before publication.
Yeah.
Polish it before you send
Like,
it.
oh, I know that it's not perfect and it's not edited. It's like, well, why isn't it edited? You just come across as lazy.
Exactly. And in addition to that, you also want to present your business case because these publishers are running a business.
Yeah.
Fuzzwolf is slightly different from Sofa Wolf. Sofa Wolf makes a bigger investment in the books, and so they really need to know that there's a market that they're going to be able to sell however many they make in the print run. I know Fuzz does some copies ahead of time, but they're much more of a print on demand.
Fur Planet can afford to be a bit more experimental because of their business model.
Right. And so, but in any case, what you're going to want to say is, this is the kind of feedback I've received. This is the kind of market my book is appealing to. This is the number of sales that I think I could get from it. This is what I expect, et cetera, et cetera. Just basically explain why a publisher should put effort into publishing your book. Because these guys are furries and they have an interest in seeing furry fiction sold, and they will help you out, but they're not going to generate demand for your book. That is largely up to you.
Yeah, I mean, you are the commodity, and, it's, like you said, you got to make a business case for it.
Exactly.
And, the publisher isn't going to expect, you're not going there to drop a bunch of work on them.
Right. And, honestly, if things don't work out with the publishers, self-publishing is not a bad way to go.
No, I know a bunch of authors who do that, and pretty successfully.
Yeah. So, let's move on to another related question. This one is from our stubby leg friend, Zia McCorkey. And he writes, I have 2 questions for the esteemed pair of Wright and Fox and Otter. I hope you can help. And,
we try our best.
We do try our best, and I hope you weren't in need of a fast response to this. But again, we apologize for that. So I'll read the questions separately, and we'll talk about them separately so that we don't lose track of.
Sure.
First, I have recently written a book.
Congratulations.
Yay. I've finished the editorial work on it during the recent holiday. It is getting published and will soon enter the fandom under the flag of Fur Planet. So, there you go.
Yeah, proof positive.
I'm very excited, as well you should be. I'm going to stop narrating his letter now. I have ideas for a sequel I want to write. More accurately, 2 sequels. Neither one have much to do with the other or the first book, but they're all set in the same world about different people. You've both talked about how you have to get stories out or else. I'm in a similar boat. I've been getting all these ideas for both stories that I want to tell. I know I now have to concentrate on one of them and start actually writing it. My problem is that I'm worried that as I write one book, the other story will die from neglect. I really love both ideas, but I know when it comes to my writing that my attention span is finite. Do you have any ideas for what I should do?
If you're worried about the ideas going away, find some way to record them in a more permanent, less ephemeral form so that you can go back to them later.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep a notebook. Take notes. Leave notes on your computer. Jot down outlines. Do something so that you can at least give either the story some shape or a structure, or if you can't get that much out, at least put down like the little fragments of ideas that you have that might be neat to follow up on. If you still need to follow up on them, you can follow up on them later. And as long as you have them recorded somewhere so that you don't forget them, that should be a good way to help you with that.
Buy a little dry erase board or buy a cork board or something and put it up in your room or wherever you sit near the computer to do your writing and thinking, and write notes about the story. And, every time you think of something new about it, while you're writing the other one, write little notes about the second one. And, keep those notes, keep it in a notebook, keep it on a corkboard on your wall, keep it up on a dry erase board, something like that, whatever. But, the other thing that I would say is keep the notes about the story, but if you can only write one story at a time, pick the one that moves you more.
Yeah.
And this is a big thing that I know I still struggle with, but the ideas will come back. If you're worried that this other story idea is going to go away, it might go away. But I guarantee you, 100% guarantee you, that by the time you finish writing this first idea, you'll have more.
Yeah.
And they will excite, and if they don't excite you as much as the previous idea, as the second one you have now that you're going to put aside, you will remember that second one because it excites you more than anything else you've thought of since.
Yeah.
I've had ideas for stories, and I know emotionally it's really hard to let go of them. It's really hard to say, man, I had this great idea, and I can't remember what I was going to do with it, and it's so frustrating, and, it's like that old cliche T-shirt says, if you love something, let it go, and if it doesn't come back,
it was never meant to be.
Right.
You stole my line, which
if
I was stealing from countless other people.
If it doesn't come back, then you're a failure.
If it doesn't come back, then use somebody else's mate to cheat on it. I don't know. That's a Hirosaki story right there, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't even know what that means.
But
no, seriously. The power of being a writer, this is, now I'm cribbing from the end of the Stephen Donaldson, Thomas Covenant trilogy, but the power of being a writer is that you can always come up with another idea. People get writer's block, people get, some people claim to have ideas dry up on them, but you have to let yourself, let the ideas go, because the other thing that might happen with this is you cling on to this second idea. By the time you finish the first book, the second idea doesn't excite you anymore, but you feel obliged to write it because you've held on to it for this long.
Never feel obliged to do anything for something that doesn't exist.
And then, exactly. And then you're writing this idea, and it gets dreary, and it becomes work.
Wow, that was some Zen shit I just spouted.
It was.
Yeah.
You need more port.
No, I'm good.
So, that's what you should do. Pick one of the ideas, write down some notes on the other one, and if it still excites you when you finish the first one, go ahead and write it. But I guarantee you will have another idea by the time you're done your first book.
Yeah, and he's apparently already done with his first, and now he's moving on to his second.
First of these two ideas.
So,
and congratulations about your book. We will look forward to seeing it.
Yep.
Secondly, Zia continues, for my soon-to-be published book, I plan to have illustrations and cover art. I know both of you have books with stellar art inside that really helps capture the mood of your work. I've found a great artist. I'm overjoyed every time he sends me the work he's done. The problem is that he's very new to the illustration of books business, and so am I, and he's been very uncomfortable talking about remuneration. I want to pay him a fair wage for the excellent work he's doing. He's nearly finished the job, and by next month we'll have wrapped things up. That's this month now. What do you, the experienced gurus of furry publishing, consider to be a fair pay for art and books?
Well, I mean, that sort of comes back to what we already discussed, which that's something that the publisher should hash out, or if it doesn't come to the publisher, it should come to you, and, negotiate that with the artist. There's no, set rate that, you should get paid this much for doing an illustration for this type of thing. There's, I guarantee you the artist doesn't have this, cheat sheet that they carry around with them that says, if it's less than this, say no.
Yeah, but he says the artist is a little reluctant to talk about money, and I think it's really interesting in the furry fandom because artists do work for pay all the time. So essentially, what you're doing is commissioning art from him to use in publication, and at that point, it's up to him to decide whether the fact that it's going to be in a book is worth a discount, or if he wants to be, paid with royalties from the book because his art's helping sales, or if he just wants to sell you the art at a flat rate and license you to print it in the books, or whatever. But that's really his decision.
Yeah, it's the artist's call. What's a fair price for what they want?
Right. So I understand it's complicated too when you're friends, and it sounds like you're friends with this artist because otherwise he wouldn't be that uncomfortable discussing money matters. But really, you can make it easier by saying, this is a business. I'm asking for work from you for pay. So, what would you charge for a commission? You might, maybe it's worth a discount if he's doing like 10 interiors and he says, because I really love the characters and I'm doing a bunch of art for you, instead of charging you X for, instead of charging you 10 times X, I'm going to charge you 9 times X and give you 10 illustrations.
Yeah.
But that's up to him. I don't know.
But yeah, no. I was going to say, as far as published art for my stuff, I mean, I have stuff that was published in Heat, which Softwolf got all that art for me. And then my story in X, you asked me, hey, who do you want to do art for your story? I said, hey, Ocelot would be great. And you got Ocelot to do a great picture.
And indeed she was.
She did, yeah. And I mean, that was out of my capable webbed paws. So take my advice for what you think it's worth.
Yeah, I don't know that I have that much else to add to it. If you have a further question about it, follow up, you know where to reach us. That's unsheathedpodcast@gmail.com. And in a brief side note to that, we do get private messages on FA sent to the Unsheathed account. Both of us read them, but it's harder to get those into the queue because we have to copy them into an email and then send them to the Gmail account, because the Gmail account is where we read all of our letters from.
Basically it's a pain in the ass and we're lazy.
Yeah, exactly. So send them to the Gmail account, and that's your best avenue to getting something right on the air.
Yeah, and not that we're going to ignore you if you send it to FA, but the quickest and most reliable way is through Gmail.
So we're at about a 5-minute, but I think we have time for one quick question here, which we've talked about a bit. This one is from Dimitri, and he says, I have a question for both of you. One thing I've noticed about your stories is that even if they aren't about something I easily relate to, I usually end up thinking about them for some time afterward. Is there a method for choosing, creating thought-provoking stories, or is that achieved more by writing technique, e.g. establishing settings, scenarios, and characters in a way that lets any reader relate?
I think it's a little of both. I think that there are certain themes that will be more universally appealing. Conversely, there are themes that might resonate more strongly with maybe only a certain subset of people, but if you write about it in a certain way that, hey, this doesn't apply to me, but it's still compelling and thought-provoking, then I think that's possible too. Like, take like a romantic comedy movie. Like, I can't relate to, what it's like to date a girl, but that doesn't mean that, I'm not going to enjoy a story about that if it's, told in a, compelling, witty, funny enough way.
True. And thank you, by the way, for saying that our stories are thought-provoking.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. It's a very great compliment.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's something that we both aspire to. I agree to that, although I would say that you relate to a romantic comedy in kind of a way of two people getting together rather than specifically about getting together with a girl. But I think, so I do want to add, I was chatting with Foosball and mentioned this question, and his response was good characters. He said, if you have good, easily relatable characters, people will relate to them and care about what they do and will think about it afterwards.
Yeah, if the reader can be with a character during their journey and be invested enough to care how it turns out at the end, then the details of the journey itself are less significant as long as the reader is going to care what happens to that person.
And I think Kit and I just saw a movie, Up in the Air, which is a good example of this. I don't think either of us could really relate in a direct sense to any of the situations in the movie, really. But the characters' problems were illustrating kind of a larger question about life and how to live life and how to deal with life. And on that level, the movie really resonated. It's also, Kit and I would both recommend it as an excellent movie, one of the best ones we've seen this year. So I think I mean, a lot of the stories that I write are not from my personal experience.
I hope not. Oh my God.
And I'm fairly certain that some of Hirosaki's stories are not from personal experience. So I think what we do is we kind of select.
That was a loaded statement if I ever heard one.
We kind of come from, once you've listened to Unsheathed Presents #2, you'll understand. I think we look at things like, how would someone deal with this situation? Even if we've never dealt with it, if we think it's interesting enough to find out, I'm trying to think of one of the stories I've written, like the superhero story. How do you deal with someone who really wants your affection but doesn't really know you?
Yeah.
And it's not, none of us is a superhero. None of us has, weird powers like that. But a lot of us have been in that situation where somebody's kind of presuming on, whether it's an acquaintance to, a larger extent than the acquaintanceship would allow.
Yeah. Or the story that comes to my mind that I've written is, my story in X, which is based on, the thou shalt not bear false witness. I mean, that was a theme that was presented to me, but regardless of whether, the impetus comes from the outside or just a concept that you think up, that's basically a message that's like, hey, like, don't talk shit about people,
right.
Basically. And then it's like, okay, like, what's the lesson to be learned from that? What sort of story does that lead to? And I go, okay. And I thought about that and go, okay, here's a situation where this is the crux of the story. And then, the story sort of builds off of that.
But you present it in a compelling way, because it's easy to stand there and say, don't talk shit about people. But
right.
Then what you have to come up with is, what's a situation where you would be tempted to do so?
Right.
And, that's something that we can all relate to, because we've all had situations at one time or another where we just said, man, I'd really just like to say this. And you're like, no, I can't do that. It's not really true. It's just kind of what So, and I thought.
So you're saying we've all been through junior high and high school?
Well, most of us.
Oh.
Well, we know someone who's been homeschooled.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying something completely different.
So, yeah, that's it. Write compelling characters, pick a good topic, and pick something that interests you, and that interest will transfer itself to the reader.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
So we're going to wrap it up. We're going to wish you happy holidays, whatever holiday you celebrate.
Yep. And a happy forthcoming new year.
And let's hope I think this will be our last episode of 2009.
Our last episode of the decade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. We've very much enjoyed doing this. We thought we weren't sure how long we were going to be able to keep it going, but we're not tired of it yet. So.
We're getting closer to a half a year.
We are.
Yeah.
Another month.
We're past the 1/3 mark.
Wow, another month. And we will be doing a live episode at Further Confusion. We've had that pretty much confirmed.
Uh-huh.
Although apparently we cannot say cock in the audience.
Yeah. Oh, token blowjob reference.
Unless we're talking about roosters.
Oh, right. Oh.
Well, we won't be able to talk about blowjobs at Further Confusion unless we couch it in euphemistic terms. So we're going to have to come up with some kind of code so that everybody knows what we're talking about when we say.
So if you were going to put your mouth on someone's peanut, no, that's...
We'll come up with something. So send us, there we go. There's a holiday exercise for our listeners. Send us a coded phrase we can use to signify a blowjob on our live shows so that we don't get caught by censors. That's your assignment for the holidays. Kaz, I'm looking at you.
I just like amused the fact it's like, wow, we're giving our listeners blowjob homework. That's awesome.
You know, I would have paid a lot more attention in high school if we'd gotten that kind of homework in high school.
There's a
I
story idea right there.
I was a little bit broken there. I'm gonna.
Yeah.
So
make that into a compelling story idea.
So anyway, send us emails, unsheathedpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me as Kyell on FA. And where else? Oh, kyellgold.livejournal.com.
Yep.
I'm also Kyell Gold on Twitter, and I occasionally post about projects I'm working on, and if you want to read more about them, read the Live Journal.
Yep. I am also Cam Hirosaki at Live Journal. I'm Cam_Hirosaki on FA. And you can also twitillate me at Cam Hirosaki.
My, that's an open invitation.
Yeah, it's very twittulating. Her English.
We knows English good. All right, well, have a happy holiday.
Yeah,
best
happy
wishes.
New Year,
be productive. Be writing, and set a writing goal for 2010.
Yeah, and feel free to bring me a bottle of wine if you run into me at Further Confusion.
Yeah, that'll be one of our first shows of 2010. We'll talk about our goals for the new year and our resolutions and stuff.
To get fans to give me free booze, okay.
So, all right. Good night.